One of the most acclaimed aspects of an already lauded film like The Nightmare Before Christmas is its many great characters, because whether it's the two leads, the neurotic, two-faced mayor, the delightfully sadistic Oogie Boogie and his mischievous henchmen Lock, Shock, and Barrel, or even a more frazzled take on jolly old Saint Nick himself, one thing this movie definitely has going for it is its ability to get the audience invested in whoever's on screen. But there is one character that this applies to probably even more so than was intended, with that being Dr. Finkelstein, Sally's creator and de facto warden. Because at first glance he appears to be just a demanding and overbearing father figure to poor Sally, but many have noted that underneath that cranky surface seems to lie a much more complex figure. And today, I'd like to go over Dr. Finkelstein's role in The Nightmare Before Christmas and specifically how it contributes to the movie being so good. And now would probably be a good time to mention that there will be spoilers ahead, so if you haven't seen the film yet but plan to, you might want to come back another day. You have been warned. Okay, so to get right into it, one of the less talked about aspects to Dr. Finkelstein's character is that he actually makes for a pretty effective red herring. Because to those not in the know, at first he looks like a pretty threatening figure, especially towards Sally, and as the movie goes on, his patience only starts wearing more and more thin, making it almost look like a foregone conclusion that he's going to snap and become a threat to her, and possibly even Jack, by the time it's over. But that never happens. Once Sally escapes for good, he simply gives up on her and goes back to the drawing board, and while she goes out of her way to avoid him, he never ends up really posing a threat to anybody. In other words, before Oogie Boogie enters the picture, Dr. Finkelstein does do a pretty good job of misdirecting the audience on where the narrative might be heading, even if that threatening demeanor doesn't amount to much. Though ironically, and as most of you probably already know, originally he wasn't intended to be a red herring at all and actually was going to turn out to be the villain in the end. Because in the original version of the script, after Jack pulled off Oogie Boogie's thread, Dr. Finkelstein was going to be underneath, revealing that he made up the Oogie Boogie persona as revenge because Sally chose Jack over him. But Tim Burton absolutely hated this ending and insisted that it be changed, and this plot point was quickly dropped. And for several reasons, most agree that Burton was absolutely right, because while Finkelstein becoming the villain itself looks like a possibility even in the finished film, his being Oogie Boogie has absolutely no foreshadowing connected with it, which is an absolute must, as I stressed in another video which you can find a link in the description to, and wastes what is honestly a great character. So Finkelstein was instead sidelined after Sally escapes for the final time, and Oogie Boogie was made his own separate character. And once again, most agree that was definitely for the best. But, in a testament to how well the film is made, the writers smartly didn't drop Finkelstein altogether like one might expect and instead made a point of finishing his story in another logical way, which was have him make a new creation that was everything he wanted Sally to be but wasn't. And it's in that, as well as his relationship with Sally, that makes him among the most interesting characters in the movie for many people. Because as I noted at the start, Finkelstein starts out as a creepy, almost threatening figure that insists on keeping Sally under his constant guard for no real reason, making him look irrationally possessive. But as the film goes on, it's slowly revealed that he has a softer side, to the point that even Sally is shown to have a degree of fondness for him, and is also shown to have a great professional relationship with Jack, and is just as fond of him as everybody else. And that honestly makes for a much better character than if these nicer moments were all revealed to be an act, and that he'd let his obsession with Sally drive him to villainy. Because with these moments to go on, it can easily be inferred that Finkelstein is simply lonely and looking for a companion of some kind. Now, what exactly he created Sally to be is left open to interpretation, but whatever it was, it's clear that rather than for any scientific purpose, he wanted somebody to talk to and form a connection with. The only problem was that he took this need too far and insisted on keeping her locked up, as if forcing her to be his companion and his alone, and that ended up driving her away. But if nothing else, he definitely seemed to learn from that mistake, as his follow-up creation contains half his brain, and therefore would never want to leave him, because let's face it, you can't make something a much more literal extension of yourself than that. And when you look at it, this common interpretation of Finkelstein as lonely and desperate for some kind of companion is a very easy one to get behind. Not only because he goes out of his way to make creations that'll keep him company, but even his overall behavior suggests it as well. Because while most would agree that his trying to keep Sally on a leash is unhealthy, one also has to keep in mind that this is Halloween Town, where everyone loves the dark and messed up. So it's possible that stuff like that is actually a normal thing, within tolerances of course, and Sally doesn't take to it because she was artificially created and not a true resident. After all, Santa Claus does say that she's more normal than most of the other residents. To put it another way, Finkelstein's characterization does just scream of a lonely old man who wants somebody to keep him company and understand him, but due to the way Halloween Town and its residents work, he goes about both expressing and dealing with it in, shall we say, not the best ways possible, and thus causes a lot of friction between him and Sally as a result. But rather than have that result in his ultimately descending into evil like was originally intended, the movie instead gives him his own happy ending where he's able to make his ideal creation, which not only cures his loneliness, but frees up Sally to get with Jack without any threat of interference from him whatsoever. And once again, not only does this work better because it allows Oogie Boogie in all of his villainous glory to be his own deliciously evil character that the audience gets to enjoy, but ultimately framing Finkelstein in a somewhat sympathetic light and letting him have his happy ending also adds to a major appeal of the movie. Because as I explained in further detail in another video, which you can also find a link in the description to, and as I already briefly touched on, the residents of Halloween Town may love all things scary and disturbing, but they're not evil like one might expect. To them, scaring people is simply good-natured fun, and would never even think of actually hurting anybody. They may be monsters, but they're ultimately nice monsters, as Jack himself perfectly demonstrates. That's why the sole exception to this, that being Oogie Boogie, is shunned, feared, and hated by the residents of the town, because he actually is evil and takes sadistic pleasure in torturing and killing people, which is everything they reject. So it makes sense that Finkelstein would end up falling into the same mentality as his fellow townsfolk, appearing scaring and threatening at first, but ultimately being a good person when all is said and done. As I said, that does make him a more compelling character than if he had just turned to villainy out of spite once Sally rejected him for good. So in the end, Dr. Finkelstein may work well as an initial red herring for where the story might be heading, but ultimately they made the right call listening to Tim Burton and keeping Oogie Boogie a separate character and have him just turn out to be a lonely man who has difficulty expressing what he wants, especially because that lines up a lot better with the story overall. Because when you really look at it, even Jack and Sally have a similar problem they have to overcome, thus making Finkelstein's fit like a glove even if that wasn't what was originally intended. Though as I noted before, what also helped was that the narrative didn't forget about him once Sally abandoned him and made sure to still finish his story. So while he's not that important of a character when all is said and done, his inclusion, especially in the finished film, does indeed improve an already great film with his many layers of complexity. Okay, I think I've made my point here. So now I'd like to hear what you guys think. Do you believe that the character of Dr. Finkelstein perfectly fills his intended role in The Nightmare Before Christmas, to the point that he almost comes across as even more interesting than the writers probably intended? Or do you believe he would have been better off turning out to be Oogie Boogie in the end? Please feel free to let me know in the comments. Because as I always stress in my videos, you don't have to agree with anything subjective that I said here and can think I was totally wrong if you'd like. And I'll respect your opinions as long as you are respectful of others in turn. And thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it. And I hope to see you all next time.